Now then, ladies and gentlemen, how's it going? It's Matty right here. Welcome on board. It's a pleasure to have you here again. Today in this video we are going to review the preset packs version 2 and version 3 from Chris Hau. So before we start, I just want to do a quick shout out to Chris Hau for choosing me to test out one of his preset packs. A couple of weeks ago he put out an Instagram post asking people to email him so that he could pick a few people to test out his preset packs. And out of a couple of hundreds and thousands of people, I never expect that he would pick me. So thank you for that, Chris, if you're watching this. Now, having said that, I finally had some time to sit down after all this hectic period to edit my photos using these presets that he sent. I've used a couple of presets on this preset pack, but I'm just going to go through a few presets that really stood out to me. Now let's start with Kelowna. This preset works really well with landscape as well as portrait, and mostly in shaded area or when it's cloudy. I took some of the shots in Peak District where the conditions were really moody and also quite foggy. Now I love how the actions on this were quite minimal and I don't need to really turn up the slider too much, so I mainly tweak just the exposure as well as the color balance. So for me, Chris has definitely nailed it for this preset right here. I also tested it out on a portrait, and here my partner was standing in the middle of foggy forest, and I just love how the skin tone were really well maintained and kept without needing me to create another new brush to correct the color skin tone. Now it also works really well with drone aerial top-down shots where the conditions are normally cloudy. So here is one of my shots that I took in up in Peak District where the condition was really cloudy and there was not really any sun around and the light was just quite evenly lit. And I also shot this in the early autumn season, so that kind of helps as well with the color. And because if I shot this in autumn as well, and it really brought out the color really nicely, so I have to say this really turned out quite nicely in my own opinion. And I also love how the blue water in the river were able to be pulled out so quite well as well. And it's not just those, I also tried it on the cityscape as well, so it's just minimal editing on the slider. By just turning up the exposure and the contrast up a bit, I was able to get the color theme that was similar to the portrait that I took in the forest. Now, next up we have the sick tones vibe. When Chris called this a sick tones vibe, he literally means that. So I tried it out on a shot of a really foggy morning up in Peak District where the car were passing through some mountains, and the way it managed to desaturate the greens and maintain the other colors are just superb in my opinion. With this shot I only increased some exposure and only shifted the color balance, and I left the rest as they were. Then I just added the gradient mask from the top to add a bit more haze from where the fog was coming from. It really created that deep desaturated green cinematic look that you often sometimes see in the blockbusters movie. Next we have the blue vibes. Now there's no secrets that I like to have blue vibes in my photos, as you can see from my Instagram feed already, so I have to test this preset out. Again, I find this works really well with landscape, especially places like in the woods or forests or somewhere general just with a lot of trees. Here we have some awesome colors with some falling leaves mixed with some slight hints of bluish tones of the road. We mainly just decrease the color balance and decrease the contrast a bit and up the exposure a bit so the car stands out more. Other than that, there's no other changes, so for me this looks quite decent in my own opinion. I also found that this preset works really well with cars generally. Red cars, blue cars, silver cars, you name it, but these are the three that I tested on and I found that it works really well. It really maintained those colors as well as pushing those color contrasts. Overall, just really nice look about it. And finally, I also tried it out on a foggy scenery, one of my favorite shots of all time in my local area. To be honest, I never would have thought that I would see this kind of scene in my local area, so quite happy, quite chuffed about this shot. But here we go. With this shot, I increased the exposure and I left the color balance as it was and increased the contrast a bit, as well as created a new circular gradient to make myself or the subject pop more. So it was again almost an one-click edit with a very small minimal tweak. So the time that I took this shot was during the evening and the condition was quite foggy as well. So it seems to me like this blue vibes works really well with conditions such as during the morning or during the evening when the light was not quite as intense, and what it does is really creating those moody atmosphere with a hint of cinematic feel to it. The last but not least that I want to touch on is the earthy vibes. Now this one is called Earthy vibes for a reason. The greens in this presets were well maintained and kept throughout, but with the exception of the blues were slightly a little bit more on the desaturated side. Here's an example. As you can see from this shot right here that I took on a sunny day up in Peak District, where the glider really stood out in this warm sunny day. It has a really desaturated sort of blue sky, but it maintained the greens on the grass to keep everything in well balance. Now the things that have changed right here are the exposure level, the shadow and the blacks. I've turned them up to keep them well balanced together just to give it an overall good look. So overall for me, this is really another solid preset. Again, works really well in sunny condition and it requires a very minimal tweak. Of course, I only picked this preset to talk about for now, and it is all down to personal preferences. So you might find that other presets might work better for you, but for me, these presets are the one that stood out for me when I edited my shots and worked well for me. So for different people shooting in different conditions, different presets in this pack will work differently for different scenes and different scenarios. So you will really have to test them out on an individual basis. But overall, I really have enjoyed all of these presets that he has put together. I do highly recommend you checking it out if you're into landscape photography, car photography, as well as portrait photography, because this kind of preset works quite well with all of these genres. With just a little bit of fine tuning, you will be able to get a pleasing look that you are going to like. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this little review that I put together, and I hope you find this review useful. If you do, don't forget to hit that like button if you like what you see, and do consider subscribe if you haven't yet. Comment down below if you have any questions at all, and until then, I will see you on the next video.